Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where today, of course, we are looking at commercial conversions in this kind of crazy world that we suddenly find ourselves maybe coming out of, hopefully, at the moment, kind of with lockdown easing or kind of on its way to be eased. So really what today we want to look at is commercial conversions. We have a new use class order, we've got a new PD right, we've got the world kind of recovering from COVID. And so what I wanted to do today was to introduce my panelist here. Hi, Suzi Carter.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Paul.
How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very good. Thanks.
Fabulous. So Suzi's going to be helping me try to work out where we are and where the opportunities are today. Suzi is next surveyor at CBRE. She was acquisition surveyor at B&Q Kingfisher, and then a surveyor for land security. So got a fair bit of experience of property as part of that. Now she's an investor, developer, consultant, mentor, and property coach as well. So I think we're in pretty safe hands. So I suppose, Suzi, before perhaps people don't know who you are and can't know much about you, then perhaps I could just ask you a sort of quick question. So obviously your background has been sort of national agencies and national brands and all this kind of stuff. What was it that made you move from some of those kind of quite high profile roles into investing and mentoring and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I'd always wanted to set up my own business, but frankly didn't really have the balls to do it. So for many years in the corporate world, I kind of wanted to do it. And then I actually finally went on a property training course, which sounds a bit odd given that I'd been in the corporate world doing property for many years. And I think through that, I developed the mindset and the belief that I could set up on my own. And, you know, the corporate world was very good to me, and, you know, I learnt my craft there. But yeah, the roller coaster ride that is being an entrepreneur is definitely much more fun and much more fulfilling. And really kind of, I think we all know that you can create true wealth through that as well, which is kind of, you know, and it's much more interesting. So
amazing. So let's kind of perhaps start off. I guess we've got sort of Class E and PD rights and that sort of stuff to go through. So should we kick off and start working through this?
Yeah, sure. So let me just share my screen. So right, where are we? I'm having a few wrinkles with my PowerPoint at the moment, so I think it's going to be okay, but fingers crossed. So good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So yeah, I'm going to be talking to you about kind of why we find ourselves in this crazy, I mean, well, I think we're all hoping it's a post-COVID world. We're hoping that this is going to carry on much longer. So I'm going to talk to you about kind of why there is an opportunity for I think there's a moment in time at the moment that to be taken advantage of. So kind of why is that, and how's it come about? And then we're going to talk about two very specific changes to the planning system that have come about as a result of this. One is the new Class E, which basically groups town centre uses into one use class. And also the PD rights, but more particularly Class MA, which comes into force on the 1st of August, and is potentially a bit of a game changer for commercial conversions. So I'm going to talk to you kind of about what that is, what that comprises, and where the opportunities are coming out of these changes, and also potentially what some of the trip hazards are. Because, you know, you definitely need to present this as warts and all, because there are some trip hazards as part of this as well. So without further ado, I think we all know what happened in 2020. Two generationally.
I missed it actually, Suzi. Yeah, what was it again?
yeah. You're too busy at home on Zoom, obviously, Paul.
Yeah, go on.
But, yeah, so two generationally defining events. And let's not forget about Brexit as well, because, you know, amazingly, Brexit kind of got overshadowed by the whole COVID malarkey. But, you know, that has given structural changes to especially the commercial property industry, which is very outward focused. There's lots of foreign investors in the UK in commercial property, lots of overseas occupiers as well, especially with the status of the UK as a kind of global centre, or London certainly. So I'm going to rattle through these, but I think it's just important to kind of say how how this has come about. So I don't know about you, but I got pretty sick of hearing the word unprecedented last year, because it definitely was, but I think that I'm sure there could be more words that could have been used to describe it. So it really was. I mean, you know, high streets vacated, no one there, offices vacated. I don't need to tell you what happened last year. And, you know, basically, I think that the press has basically said, oh, it's all been brought about by COVID, but it hasn't. And this is my absolute favorite quote that pretty much sums up what's been happening in the commercial property industry, certainly in retail in 2020, which is there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happened. And basically, by that famous capitalist, by the way, Lenin. So basically, all this stuff was happening anyway. And there are trends that were happening, but they've just been accelerated. So I don't think that some of the trends in retail would probably have come to bear until about 2030, maybe later. But what's happened is that it's basically brought it all forward. So kind of, I'll just talk to you kind of why that is. So the first thing that happened to our town centres was that local authorities granted loads of consent for loads of out of town retail parks and shopping centres. So the retail parks, you know, took a lot of retail from the town centres. Retailers loved it because they could have big stores out of town that they can't even have in town centres. And then loads and loads of shopping centres were consented as well. And all that did, actually, if you look at shopping centres, yes, they probably brought a third of their operators in from outside that weren't in the town already. But all that happened really is that existing operators moved off the high street into kind of better configuration of units. They upsized generally. And, you know, it just basically has led to massive oversupply. This was all happening anyway. This is not new stuff. Loads of retailers expanded, and what happens, this happened at B&Q when I was there. What happens is retailers expand to get market share. So they try and be anywhere and everywhere. And then suddenly they realize they've got too many stores and it becomes a cost liability. And then they just stop. And then they start disposing or they start rationalizing. And then on top of that, you've got these zombie businesses that were really only being propped up by the economy. You know, so you take the Arcadia Group, which Topshop's part of. And, you know, that was Philip Green took however many billion out of it, like a bit of an asset stripping type circumstance, you know, and it was never really had a chance. It wasn't getting any investment. So it's not surprising that group went down. There's too much space, you know, people were taking too much space and they couldn't exit from leases, despite the whole CVA system, which kind of let some retailers off the hook. And, you know, some formats hadn't evolved for tens of years, you know, like Debenhams, etc. I think bland retail, identikit high streets, don't need to say much more about that. I'm sure you kind of have seen that. And, you know, I think the customer just got turned off. You know, why would you want to get off your sofa when you can shop online when you go to a high street and it's just a bit boring? So I think, you know, I'm certainly in that shop, even though I worked in retail for years. You know, I love a bit of online shopping if I don't need to get off my sofa, that's for sure. And some operators grew too aggressively and rents were too high. So Jamie's Italian is a great example of that. And a lot of the restaurant groups, the restaurant chains did that. They basically wanted to grow market share. They took crazy rents. They were propping up the high street at one time, actually, when I was managing a big portfolio of shopping centres. And then, you know, your nice niche little innovative small retailers and operators just couldn't afford rents because all these big operators were paying it and landlords weren't willing to settle for it. So there was no variety on high streets. Lots of the high street is owned by lots of different owners. So, you know, it's very difficult to be strategic on a high street. And there's been little public sector leadership. And I think that needs to come in now to kind of look after our high streets a bit more. Oops, sorry. I told you it was having a funny moment today. And then you've got a load of institutional owners. So, you know, the pension funds, property companies, that valuations were being propped up by the estimated rental values that their valuers put on the valuations. And therefore they're not willing to reduce those rents, or pre-COVID, they weren't willing to reduce those rents. And then you've got business rates. You know, I think a lot of retail agents and retailers blame business rates for the woes on the high street, but that's just one of many things that you can see. Online retail, there was a record 35% of all retail in January was online. And now that number has dropped back a bit, but we're expecting to see it around that number kind of going forwards. And then so what was happening was that retailers were trying to, it became a buyer's market. This is even pre-COVID. They were trying to negotiate flexible leases, turnover rents, and shorter leases just because they could, because it's a buyer's market, and valuations were reducing as a result. So none of this is new. This was kind of all happening anyway. So what we're left with is too much space, vacant units, and then obviously on top of that, the COVID lockdowns have happened. So retailers haven't been able to trade. So that's kind of retail. A little bit of depressing start to the whole presentation, yes. But there is an upside. Believe me, I'm going to come on to it.
Well, it does create some opportunity, I think, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And then, of course, on top of that, we mustn't forget the office. A lot's been said about the future of the office. Personally, I do think the office has got a role, but just in a different guise than it is now. I think there's going to be, I think people will, especially younger people, will be looking for, social interaction. I think that there'll be a lot of hub working, serviced offices, etc. But there is a question mark at the moment over that too. So what is happening now? I'm just going to rattle through this. So brands haven't been paying rent. Funnily enough, that the smaller operators have been paying, kind of one-man bands, one-woman bands, but brands have been looking for reduced rent just because they could. The landlords haven't been able to evict, but obviously that's coming to an end now. There's been supply and demand imbalance, so it's a buyer's market, short leases, flexibility, valuations have fallen. Don't think that's a bad thing, actually, unless you own a load of retail, then obviously it is a bad thing, but there's other things you can do with it. The government is looking at changing the business rate system. We'll see how far they go on that. There's divestment by investors, a lot of investors, actually, a lot of big pension funds, etc., are moving out of retail. They're just trying to drop it like a ton of bricks so that they can go invest in logistics and alternative asset classes. So there's a lot of divestment by big investments from retail. The retailers are changing their business models. So they're kind of trying to integrate their online and their physical operation. And they're trying to do their last mile logistics, which is kind of the delivery to the customer from their stores. So some are, some aren't. So you need to kind of really understand your occupiers' space and business requirements.
I think that kind of experience. Last week we did a webinar with CACI, who kind of obviously advise on all the sort of the location arts and that kind of stuff for the sort of big retailers and stuff. And they were very much saying that kind of multi-channel approach of kind of all the retailers now looking at whether they're selling stuff through the stores or online, and then kind of how that kind of retail portfolio then services that. And so whether they need more space, less space, if they're bringing the sort of the online stuff into those stores, they want more space. If they're moving it elsewhere to a logistics center somewhere else, they need less space. And so suddenly you get this opportunity to kind of move stuff around, don't you? And sort of little spare unused bits in the retail space can go next door or whatever. Yeah,
no, definitely. And I would say in this whole post-COVID market, it's really dangerous to generalize about anything about, size requirements. Everyone's going to have their own business model. So it's very important to really specialize. And I'll kind of go on to this in a minute. Yeah. Affordability, obviously, retailers are very much looking at affordability. There's a stack of empty properties. And the government have got this Welcome Back Fund, which basically is a whole bundle of measures like pavement cafe opening, relaxation of planning rules, PD rights, business development rights, longer opening hours, pubs and restaurants as takeaways, and obviously the commercial to resi opportunities that we're going to talk about today. So what will happen next? There's going to be, I think there's going to be new operators coming into the market because they'll be able to afford to. So, our nice little niche bakeries and gift shops and whatever else, will actually now be able to afford to go on the high streets. And in fact, shopping centre owners are welcoming them with open arms, which is ironic because they went to touch with the barge pole 18 months ago. Valuations have been rebased. The permitted development rights that we're going to talk about today, the PD rights, and that they've all been announced. And I think that a lot of local authorities are kind of rushing to try and get Article 4 directions out to try and restrict some of these permitted development rights. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because, you know, basically at the moment with the new permitted development rights, you can convert anything in Class E from the 1st of August to residential. And, you know, local authorities, if they're being strategic, if they're decent local authorities, will be looking to protect their prime retail pitches, and they'll be looking to bring in Article 4 directions. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there.
Quite intrigued to sort of see how that plays out as well, actually, because from a personal point of view, I kind of think a lot of prime retail won't stack up to convert anyway. There's parts of central London where it would, but I kind of feel like most town centres, the value of the prime retail space is way in excess of what the residential values are. And it's the bits at the back and the bits upstairs and that sort of stuff that kind of becomes interesting. Then it's the fringe edge bits that kind of then start to convert, where you kind of zone A rents drop right down on the edge of the, and so that's the bit I think is going to be interesting. That's kind of where I sort of see maybe it's going to shrink down a little bit and then get a bit of resi on the edge of it and this sort of stuff. So you need to see how it plays out, because I'm not sure the numbers are going to stack up otherwise. It's kind of
no, I think that's right. I think that's very obviously what the government wants to do, but a kind of an incidental side effect is that anything could be converted. So I think I think you know that definitely just need to play out, and we'll see what local authorities respond. There's definitely a bit of an experiential, leisure-led bounce back boom, and I think that's going to continue. You know, staycations, staying in hotels. I can't, you know, I'm desperate to get out to hotels, go out for dinner, go out for lunches.
Oh,
you
God,
know,
you make me cry.
Is this the Roaring Twenties, and how long will that last for? We've got, sorry, there we go. We've got the I said earlier, the multi-channel, the last mile hubs, shopping local. You know, there's still probably most of us are working from home still, or working locally. And, you know, is that going to continue? Are we going to be working from home 2 to 3 days a week? And therefore, you know, will local shops see a rise? There's some really, I live in Surrey, and there's some really lovely high streets that have been dead in the week because there just hasn't been, everyone's commuters, and they're seeing a massive uptick. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. I think in the future, town centres will go back to what they used to be actually, which is places to live, shop, work, play. So it'll genuinely be mixed use, and that genuinely can be curated by SMEs like ourselves. You know, I think there's a great opportunity for investors. It needs some public sector leadership for sure. And of course, the government's announced the free ports. And, you know, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but not every high street, not every property, and Paul's just alluded to it too, will have a conversion angle or will stack up as a conversion angle. So, you know, there's a stack of other uses that you can look at for these types of properties, like health or logistics. So I guess you'll probably hear a bit of a theme today. A kind of commercial conversions is a great opportunity, but it's not the only game in town. You know, it is still very profitable to keep in some locations, not in every location, but they still can be very profitable to keep your property as commercial. And it's about identifying the best use for it, which may not be retail, may not even be offices. It might be health, it might be nursery, it might be whatever else, but it's kind of trying not to be too blinkered as to, you know, I've got to convert everything to residential, but undoubtedly the conversion to residential is a great opportunity. So where are the opportunities then? So I put cheaper in inverted commas because I imagine a lot of people on this call will be kind of horrified if they hear me say that everything's cheaper at the moment, because it certainly isn't. Like, I'm being outbid right, left and centre for things. And
yeah, there's a comment from Bengt in the chat actually saying very little stock on the market, and a lot of it's got the Class E opportunities priced in. Actually, there's
absolutely,
certainly agreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the Class MA even, that's not even in yet. It comes in on the 1st of August. I've looked at a few things, and I've asked agents how they've got to their price, and they've said, well, it's the residential angle, of course. And you're like, well, yeah, but you've got conversion costs. You know, they've kind of priced it in already, and you know they're advertising these things in market towns at like 4.5% yield, which is ludicrous. They should be like 6-7% yield. So it is definitely being priced in at the moment. So I do wonder, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the prior approval isn't quite so straightforward as I think that everyone thinks for Class MA, certainly. And I do wonder whether once that becomes a bit of reality, that whether agents might pull back a bit on pricing some of this stuff in, but we shall see. There's obviously resi angles, conversions, and I think that if you've got deep enough pockets, then some of the bigger opportunities are actually are out there for the taking. They're not as obvious. So, the big, medium-sized shop units, shopping centres, if you can think of something to do with that, talking about converting department stores to health, hospital hubs or whatever, if you can be a bit creative, some of these bigger opportunities are actually quite good. Definitely experiential mixed use, definitely think about having mixed use in buildings, because that could be the best, that could stack the best. And there's a real need for that at the moment. There's always a demand for service-based uses. So one of the biggest tips I would give you in terms of keeping commercial as commercial would be to find uses where there will always be a demand, things where whether it's from a health perspective or a nursery or for a takeaway or whatever it might be, or a local shop or whatever, something service based, there will always be a demand for. Flexible offices, I think that I've talked to a lot of investors recently who are looking at setting up kind of a flexible office operation. So definitely flexible offices, especially local flexible offices, if we carry on working from home. You'll find some great startups, local operators. You can find those through local Facebook groups. By your knowledge of the area through local agents, etc., to go in the ground floor of some of these conversions. The government clearly sees SMEs playing a role in regeneration, needs local authority leadership. Don't underestimate grants actually for some of these conversions. So the Welsh government is particularly prevalent with grants. So if you live in Wales or investing in Wales, definitely look into that. They give loans for regeneration of commercial units, and they also give grants as well. But also a lot of, from the Midlands up, you do tend to see quite a lot of local authorities giving grants and loans. So definitely do some research into that, because it can make an unviable project viable by using some of these kind of freebies that are being given out. And definitely niching in terms of the strategies. As I say, it's very dangerous to generalize in this market about kind of what's happening. And if you can become a real expert in one permitted development right, or one town, or one strategy, you'll definitely, you'll get to know all the relationships within that space. You'll get to know the product. You'll get to know the pricing, you technically could clean up at the moment for sure. And, I've got the 4Rs model, which is, do your research into finding your gold mine investing area, look at the global trends and look at kind of where you want to specialize, and then look at the socioeconomics of the particular areas that you want to operate in. Make sure that the numbers stack, make sure the population profile's right for the kind of use you want, make sure the demand's there, speak to local agents, speak to local estate agents if you're going to do conversions to residential. Obviously look at the requirements if you're keeping as commercial, but also, are you going to sell, are you going to rent residential properties, and just make sure that you understand whether there's a demand for the type of product at the right price, and obviously price it right. Some of these things are still above retail. They're on noisy high streets, whatever. You're not going to get prime flat rents quite often. So make sure you're being realistic in your pricing. Look at the routes, look at try and get creative ways to buy. I know that's relatively challenging at the moment because of the market. There's a lot of demand, and everything's going to best bids that I can see, although I do invest in kind of Surrey and Berkshire and places, but everything is going to best bid, so it's quite difficult to be creative in purchasing when there's that amount of competition. But obviously try and get options, exchange day completion, so that you can kind of get income from day one, or at least get your planning in place or whatever. And obviously then
sorry, I suppose you still can do put two offers forward. I give you this unconditional and this subject to, exactly, and my plans are this and this overage of that. If and you sort of put that into your offers, can't you? Even if it is best and final, it's because then you're probably going to be the best overall price. The question then whether the owner wants to play the game or not.
Yeah, exactly. I would always recommend that everyone does exactly what Paul just said. So do a conditional offer and an unconditional offer, and then hopefully the conditional should be priced at such that it's quite tempting for the vendor to take. So
in fact, just on that as well, it's just quick upsell actually. So next week we've got a webinar with Adam Crooks at Requirement List. So he's ex-Rapley's, maintains a website which kind of has a whole lot of requirements on it. So just looking at your previous slides, so looking at the 4 R's, one of those we will be covering next week. That's my brother's gonna be doing that next week. So you'll get to meet Davis' brother senior, so my brother Simon, who's going to be looking at that with Adam Crooks next week. So if anyone's interested, I'll put that in the polls at the end and a link in the chat later for you to watch that if you're interested in that.
Yeah, and I use Requirement List actually, and I do find it very useful. Yeah, so I'm sure that's worth listening to. So what also needs to happen, the government relaxed legislation. They're trying to help less advantaged areas through free ports, etc. I'm talking about local authority leadership. We talk about experimental. I won't dwell on this because we've kind of talked about it already. Business rates review and residential angles. Right. Let's talk about the new Class E, because this is one of the kind of game-changing changes that have come out of the whole COVID pandemic from a planning perspective. So previously, this is Lichfield, so I can't take any credit for this. And if anybody's in, there's 2 websites I find really, really useful for planning. I really like Lichfield's charts, and I really like Planning Geek, which is a really great planning website and goes through all the permitted development changes, etc. So I kind of a plug out for both of those. So on the left-hand side, you can see the previous use classes. So you've got kind of A1, A2, A3, which obviously your shops, your cafes, your financial professional services. You've got your offices. You've got R&D, research and development. You've got light industrial and B1C. You've also got, I'm looking at the taupe now, I think it's called taupe, that greeny colour. You've got your clinics, health centres, creches and day nurseries, which were previously D1. And you've got gyms without a swimming pool, indoor sports, not involving firearms, that's quite a relief on a high street, a D2. And they're all now classified in Class E. And what it means is that previously what you would have to do to change between the classes, you would have had to make a planning application. So if you wanted to convert from a shop to an office, for example, a proper office, you would have had to make a planning application. Whereas now you can automatically just make the change. And obviously what the government's intending is that actually that these shops shouldn't be vacant while you're trying to do those changes. So, you kind of, maybe a retailer falls over, you've got a vacant shop and you try and look for one of these other uses to put in it. And you can do that. The planning system isn't stopping you from doing that. And, before you had to do impact assessments and all kind of planning tests, transport, etc. All of that is done away with. There's a few other things that have happened here. So, local shops, so no more than 280 square meters, selling like essential goods, and 1 kilometer away from a similar type of shop are now classed in this new F2, which is a protected use. So you do have to, if you've got a shop like that, you do have to apply for planning, because it's now not A1 anymore, it's actually F2.
It's your kind of little local village shop, isn't it?
Exactly.
Don't take the last local shop out of the village and convert it to a house.
Yeah, they're trying to protect local convenience shops, basically. And then in red, we can see that A4 and A5, so pubs and takeaways, are now sui generis. So again, they can't just be converted into another use, or you can't just convert to those uses, because they're kind of deemed as, firstly, kind of quite noisy and antisocial. So the planners will want to kind of have some control over where they go. And then also falling into sui generis is cinemas, concert halls, bingo halls, etc. So quite radical change that came in September last year. And there are some... Sorry,
just kind of on that slide again, actually, one of the things that I always think is kind of really interesting about that is that if you sort of sit there and look at those use class and think, well, in my town, what's the value of that? What's the price of that? Shops, well, question mark over the zone A rents and stuff. So perhaps put that to one side, but offices around us, 20 quid a foot, that sort of thing. R&D buildings, probably 10 or something like that. Manufacturing, sheds and stuff, good stuff, 8 quid. Average stuff, kind of, £4 or something like that. They're quite different numbers, but they're sort of slightly different in terms of the buildings and this sort of thing. But actually, in the right locations, there's clearly some very easy sort of wins in terms of the increase in prices there. So it's kind of quite interesting when you just think about what is the value of each of those underlying use classes and the buildings that sit with them, and then there's some quite simple things you could do, I think.
Yeah, and a couple more things on that, I guess. The first one is that they all have quite different size requirements as well. So it's very rare that I've seen a small retail unit house an R&D unit, although never say never. And the other thing is that this isn't just applying to town centres. This applies out of town as well. So what's interesting is, could you convert a large B1C light industrial unit into a relatively large retail facility if there was a demand for it, or vice versa? So that is quite a big loophole, actually. So for a government that's trying to encourage uses back in the town centre, I think that could be really exploited if you thought about it carefully, especially kind of particular if it's relevant to your local area. So what are the implications? Well, first of all, it's easier to change between town centre uses. So that's pretty obvious. It applies out of town as well. So D1, you can convert to, if I go back here, you can convert some of the clinics, to clinics, healthcares, creches, day nurseries, day centres. I think that is quite an interesting trend that's coming out of the COVID pandemic. I think that, and I'm not just talking about doctors and dentists, I'm talking about all types of health, like acupuncturists and physios and chiropractors. And, I think we're much more health aware than we were maybe 18 months ago. So to be able to convert to those uses where there is actually a lot of demand and it's on the rise is actually a really nice opportunity, and something not to be dismissed for sure. As I said, community uses and local shops are protected, and the pubs and takeaways are sui generis. It gives more flexibility for people with vacant units, and also for tenants who want to, because tenants usually have the ability within their lease to be able to dispose of their lease to somebody else. It's called assignment, or they can sublet. Sometimes tenants are stuck in properties because they can't get the right rent because the leases are quite restrictive. So this could potentially help tenants as well. But bear in mind that there may be historic planning conditions on your property, and also Section 106 requirements that might make some of these changes illegal, actually, in compliance with your planning conditions. I think there needs to be some case law on that, actually, but on the face of it, what I would recommend you do, especially if you're looking to purchase a property, is do thorough due diligence onto previous planning applications, and just make sure that there's no planning conditions saying it must, for example, it must be used for no other use other than a retail shop or whatever. Because if that's the case, that definitely restricts your Class E potential. So you just need to, be aware of that. And also any external works to facilitate the use will also still need permission. So if you want to put a new shop front in, or new signage, or you want to put a restaurant in, or a takeaway and wanted to put some extract ducting in, then that if that needed planning before, it will need planning still. You don't automatically get the that by permitted development. Obviously, the building's listed, you need listed building consent, and check the lease terms and the covenants as well. They may prevent alternative uses like the previous planning conditions. As I said before, local authorities can make an Article 4 direction to override this. So it'll be interesting whether they do. I can't see this being too controversial, particularly. They may try and do it again in their prime retail pitches, where they want to keep a small row of shops that they want to always keep as retail. It may be that they want to. It's
kind of interesting, isn't it? Like, again, I just don't think that stacks up. I mean, we're sort of, as a business, we're thinking, well, what's our next bit of space that we need, to occupy ourselves? And we're thinking, do we stay in offices, or do we take a small retail unit and have that as like a little hub for us, for the team and this sort of stuff, to and kind of have that on the edge of the retail parade. So kind of it's the same sort of price as the offices and this sort of stuff. And so why don't we do that kind of stuff? And you can be near to the, to the restaurants, the cafes and this kind of thing. It kind of becomes quite interesting really, but it's only because those numbers kind of stack up, and you're not going to take the prime retail pitch because it's going to be 3 times the price, and it doesn't really kind of stack up to do that. So I sort of, whether they're going to put Article 4 in or not, I don't really know. I don't think numbers will work, to be honest. They may not bother, but it's very interesting to see where that's going to play out, I think, in terms of the sort of that repitching of the town centres.
Yeah, I know that some London boroughs are frantically trying to get Article 4s in place. I've heard on the grapevine. So I suspect that it might start in London, and we'll see how it works.
Well, you can sort of see that in a retail unit, 20 quid a foot rental level, something like that, in Notting Hill, where values are 1,500 quid, and it's like, well, you're going to convert those all day long, aren't you? Really? So
yeah, exactly. And the market now will decide, not the local planning authorities. So in terms of other permitted development rights, there's 2 permitted development rights that were in place, will be in place on the 31st of July, and will be disappearing after that, and will be replaced by Class MA, which I'll talk about in a minute. The first one is Class M. What Class M is converting it to 150 square meters of ground floor space, which could be a shop, takeaway, bank, betting office, payday loan shop, or laundrette. They always like putting payday loan shops and laundrettes in, to residential. And that is being superseded by Class MA. So that one's going. And then Class O is going, which I think is a bit of a loss actually for a lot of investors and developers, which is basically office to residential. Now, this particular condition, permitted development right, is very lax actually, and I'll come on to kind of why Class MA is different, because whilst there's prior approval, there's not many conditions you have to comply with. So I would urge you that if you have a property that you want to do a office to resi conversion on under Class O, to get in there quickly. You've probably just about got enough time to get that sorted. Running rapidly out of time, I would suggest, but because it's a lot more lax than the Class MA, which I'll talk about in a second. Oops. And then you've got other Class E permitted development rights that are still in place. So the first one is creating 2 flats above a shop. So if you've got 1 shop unit, you can create 2 flats above it, which is fantastic because there's no prior approval required. It's only subject to kind of building regs. So if you've got a big shop unit and you split it in half, you could technically have 2 above 1 shop unit and 2 above the other. So it's a nice little wheeze for an investor to do a conversion. Now there's far cleverer planning advisors than me who are telling me that because Class A1 and A2 are now falling by the wayside, that this permitted development right might fall by the wayside as well, just because there isn't a Class A1 and a Class A2 now. I think that will just remain to be seen. But again, I would urge you that if you've got an opportunity to do this, because there's no permitted prior approval, because you can just crack on and do it, I would suggest that you did do that. And then what was always been quite good, that if you could do the previous one, you converted your upper floors, you could then convert to a C4 HMO, and up to 6 residents. And again, that was a great way of adding value to properties. So it just remains to be seen whether they're still in place post the 1st of August. But this is the one I really wanted to talk to you about today. So excuse all the writing. I did try and bring it in bit by bit, but the table wasn't playing ball, so I'm going to just have to chat you through it. So Class MA is the kind of new, potentially game-changing permitted development right that came in at the end of March, was announced at the end of March. And basically what it is everything in Class E, so everything we've just talked about, shops, financial professional services, restaurants, cafes, offices, etc., 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 can now be converted to residential up to 1,500 square meters. So if you think about the Class M that's currently in place, that's only 150 square meters, and this is now, you know, it's massive increase at 1,500 square meters.
Yeah, 6,500 is big old lump.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So there is obviously small print with this. On the face of it, an amazing opportunity, but I think the devil is in the detail on this particular one. So conversions under Class MA must be for C3 use, they must be for residential use, and they can't be used as an HMO. So if you wanted to convert to an HMO afterwards, you would have to go for planning to do that. So they've very specifically made a exception for HMOs here. So just be aware of that.
I mean, so once you've got your PD rights to change it to Resi, you're then talking about, well, is it okay for me to go from Resi to HMO? So the application isn't, can I lose this commercial building or this shop unit? That's the principle of you've lost that already is covered. It's then just is an HMO okay or not? It's the kind of the question, isn't it?
Yeah, and exactly. And they'll then be assessing it on noise, on parking standards, on, you know, all the other bits that they assess, room sizes, etc. with regard to HMOs. Oh, excuse me. The building must have been vacant. So this is a brand new vacancy test. The building must have been vacant for 3 months prior to the application. So where I'm scratching my head is, if I've got a commercial tenant in my property and I want to convert it to residential, can I serve them a notice to go? Obviously, it's quite difficult in the commercial world to get tenants to leave, but could I could do that by negotiation. Can I negotiate for my tenant to leave, then kind of market it for 3 months, and then say that, oh, well, you know, this is a, sorry, it's my vicious dog, my vicious miniature dachshund. And then can I shh. It's okay.
It's the joys of lockdown, isn't it? It's the we all laughed so much when there was that guy on TV that had the kids coming in behind him. You know, and it's got we're so used to it nowadays. It's just mad, isn't it? It's
exactly. I'm just gonna lock her out.
Lock her out, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because that 3 month period, if you serve your hostile Section 25 notice saying, well, I want to kick you out on demolition and reconstruction, kind of, if it has to be empty for 3 months, you won't have your planning ticket in place to be able to support that intention. So it's, how do the courts then find against that? It's like, well, I'm not going to put a planning application in because I've got PD rights in 3 months' time. So you wouldn't necessarily have that kind of intention you could prove so much. But which is perhaps why they've done that, I guess, is kind of to make it hard to kind of to push tenants out with the PD rights in place.
Yeah, I think it'll be very, very difficult to do it by the letter of the law. But I think you can do it by negotiation. So, you know, if your tenant wanted to leave, or if they didn't want to leave, you pay them a bit of cash, get them to leave early or whatever. You know, anything's possible by negotiation. I just don't think it's strictly what they were intending, and I just wonder whether there'll be some case law on it. I think it's one of those where you should definitely appoint a planning advisor to advise on it, and just tread quite carefully if you're trying to kick a commercial tenant out to do this. So anyway, you do have to market the property for 3 months. Personally, I don't think 3 months is long enough. You know, in the current market for a lot of retail units, it'll take probably 6 to 12 months to let it, but you may let it eventually. But, you know, I'm not complaining as an investor and developer, then, you know, that's good. It must have been in a Class E use for at least 2 years. So it must have been one of the uses on the left-hand side of my table for at least 2 years. But that is like, that is rolling. So if you converted it to Class E now and waited 2 years, you could then apply Class MA. So it's not like, you know, in a lot of the other permitted development rights, there's a kind of guillotine point at which it must have been in that use at that time. But sorry, she wants to come back in again now. Honestly. Never worked with children and animals.
No, quite.
So there isn't like a guillotine point, that it is a rolling basis. So you know, if you did that now, you could have Class MA in 2 years. It can't be undertaken in areas of natural beauty, national parks, etc. sites of scientific interest, safety hazard zones. I mean, I'm not sure why we do it in military explosives areas, but there we go. Scheduled monuments. But you can do it in conservation areas. But if you're converting the ground floor, then you need to do like an impact assessment on what the impact will be on, and you know, oh, for goodness sake. Menace, honestly. So yeah, you must do an impact assessment, see what the impact on the conservation area will be. Now, the prior approval matters, there's quite a lot of them as part of this. A prior approval application obviously is where you have to apply to discharge these prior approval matters to the local authority. It's assessed against transport and highways, so making sure that, you know, there's not going to be loads more traffic on the roads, for example, contamination, flood risk. There's going to be a noise assessment. So, you know, if you're putting it next to a nightclub, they'll probably, you either put lots of soundproofing in, or they'll kind of say that it's not appropriate. Natural light to all habitable rooms. Obviously, minimum space standards now applies to all permitted development applications. And, you know, if the business might affect the businesses in the area. If the existing use is a nursery or a health centre, then you have to do an impact assessment on the effect of losing that use in the local town. And, you know, I don't think these prior approval matters are straightforward. So, for example, you have to show that there's natural light to all habitable rooms. But if you need planning to put windows in, technically you should have done that before you put your prior approval application in. So there's some nuance here that isn't so straightforward. So I would definitely recommend you just make sure that you speak to a good planning advisor about this.
The flip side of that, Susie, is that kind of the schemes that you want to progress, the ones that, you know, I don't want to be taking a flat to market with a bedroom with no window in it. And so actually kind of it's in your interest to get that right, you know, the right schemes should get a planning consent on it. And now we've got an open door to go and to try and get those consents through permitted development rights, which means that it's much harder for the council to stop you, the planning department to stop you. So sort of, whilst it's hard to get through it, I sort of also think that if you're struggling to get through some of that stuff, you may want to rethink your scheme anyway, because it may be quite hard to dispose of at the end of it anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. All these PD rights give you is speed and certainty, really. You need to make sure that, yeah, you're going to get the end values that you've projected and got the right type of scheme, as you say. And then once it's granted, you have 3 years from the date of the prior approval to carry out the works. So there's some implications.
Sorry, it's a 56-day notice period as well, isn't it? So that's pretty exciting, isn't it? Because the new kind of Class ZAs and that sort of stuff haven't got that sort of time window on it, which is quite nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it genuinely does give you speed and certainty if you can tick these boxes. But I would just say, so I've heard on the grapevine that a lot of London boroughs are blanket refusing all the new airspace applications that are coming under the new permitted development rights, just because they don't want them and they don't understand them, and they just feel like it's safer just to turn them all down at the moment. So I'd be interested to see what they do with this. I think if you genuinely were bringing something forward in a prime retail pitch that they just do not want it to be residential, I think you will struggle, because they will find some loophole in the prior approval to turn you down. So just be aware of that, I think.
You'd probably get it on appeal though. So
I'm sure you would. I'm sure you would.
We've certainly been there a few times in terms of, you know, there's been the year of the councillors being sort of chewed off by one of the locals, and you get a recommendation for approval, you get a refuse, you go to appeal and you get it. You know, it's kind of certainly been through that a few times. But
obviously what that does is it's just elongate, you know, you're having to pay business rates in that time. You know, you best to get it right first time, otherwise, you know, and go and speak to the local authority about it, etc. So just some points on Class MA that hopefully will be useful. So obviously it's England only, so you can't do it outside of England. We've talked about the prior approval matters, so just make sure you're bulletproof on everything that you're putting forwards. As I said, it's more onerous than Class O. You know, if you look at all those prior approval matters and you look at Class O, it's very much more straightforward. So get that in the bag before the 31st of July. As I said to you earlier, a site's planning history may prevent the use of Class MA. So just make sure that you get that all checked out. You do your due diligence before you purchase. But there's undoubtedly massive opportunities. You know, this is definitely a new niche that you can go down. And if you become a specialist at this in your local authority area, in your gold mine investing area, and you get to know what will get through, won't get through, and you just cookie cutter this across your investing area, I think that there's some fantastic opportunities. I genuinely do. And, you know, there's a lot of property out there, not so much around where I live, but, you know, in a lot of towns and cities that are so obviously like houses, but have just been in commercial use. Now they're vacant. They're so such obvious ones for some direct to vendor marketing. And Paul, I know, is going to talk to you in a minute about how you can do that and how you can target and use Nimbus to target some of these properties, because, you know, this is exactly what the government wanted it for, basically. I would say speed to market is really essential here. So if you look at the early adopters of the office to residential PD rights, they were the ones that made the money and the big money. Now, I think the market's a bit smarter now than it was when that PD right came out, because I do think it's more priced in. But, you know, if Article 4s do start coming in, where local authorities start restricting the use of Class MA in certain areas, then, you know, you're best to get in there early. And, you know, I would, again, pricing is expensive. So again, direct to vendor is a really nice strategy to use for this.
I think you can kind of price it into your direct to vendor strategy, can't you? If you've got if you're direct to vendor, you can be saying, well, your building's worth this, you might get that, you might quote it at that price, and it kind of gets stigmatized and you're not kind of get it because it's not really kind of worth that. But there's this kind of this hype around this thing called Class MA. Alternatively, you can come forward with me, I'll get the planning ticket on it, I'll pay a bit more than all of that, it's got less risk. And so let's go into it together, and I'll buy it in that period. If you don't want me to sell it to me at that point, or if the world's changed, or I don't get the planning consent in that time, then you can always reapply. And so you can sort of see how sort of some sort of conditional deal would be quite attractive, because it's de-risked it for the purchaser, and the vendor's getting more. So yeah,
definitely. Kind of I think that's right for vendor finance deals, as you say, where you kind of almost go into a bit of a joint venture with the vendor. They get a big, they share a bit of the risk and have to wait a bit longer for their return, but they get more at the end of it. And of course, if you're doing it under permitted development, right, that's much more, you know, you got much more certainty than you have under normal planning. So I think it's absolutely right for vendor finance. Just a point to note that local authorities' existing Article 4 directions, which withdraw certain permitted development rights, are transferred over until August 2022. So if there's an area, and look, quite a few places in London this applies to, especially, have these Article 4 directions, they're automatically transferred over until they can put new ones in place. So don't be lulled into a false sense of security that's fallen away because it won't have done.
Suzi, a building, so it's the old Class O, is it? So it's the old Class O Article 4s that are in place, protecting office to resi. Yeah,
there's quite a lot of places in London. I mean, the obvious ones like the City of London and Westminster that restrict the Class O permitted development rights because they wanted to keep offices. So they're obvious ones, but there's areas of Lambeth and, you know, other high streets that restricted that.
Which is kind of interesting, because what's the future of the office at the moment? It's quite odd they've kind of transferred that across, really, because it's like, it's empty at the moment. So I mean,
if you're a planning authority, what do? Do you encourage that or don't you? It's kind of like
Let's protect empty offices in our council. It doesn't particularly seem like a particularly clever thing to do, does it? But
exactly. And the only kind of other thing that I would comment on is that I think that from the pricing I've seen, a lot of people are looking at this as a excuse me. A lot of people are looking at this as a strategy to do, and therefore it could quite rapidly become quite crowded marketplace where, you know, people, I mean, already I'm seeing things going to best bids. There's 8 offers in, you know, kind of stuff that probably would never have had that previously. So you might just want to kind of try and differentiate your strategy in terms of rather than just a straightforward shop and uppers. You might want to look for larger stores that, are going to be more complicated, but actually there'll be less people bidding on it, and therefore you're likely, you know, I've realized with my investing that there's a sweet spot, which is it's you know, still expensive for a lot of people, but you know, kind of just over $1 million, where it's too small for the big investors and too little for smaller investors, and therefore there is definitely a sweet spot where you can get really good pricing actually. But it doesn't need to be that much money. You know, I think there is probably a sweet spot below that too. So look at that, and also, you know, look at getting the competitive advantage any way you can, whether that's relationships with commercial agents, whether that's direct to vendor. But, you know, really try and differentiate yourself from the masses, you know, the 8 people bidding on one property. Try and differentiate yourself and try not to compete in that market, because you're just going to end up overpaying if you're not careful. And, you know, distressed properties, I'm expecting to see more distressed properties coming on the market at the end of the year. I just think once furlough's over, once all this government support is withdrawn, I do think that even though there's this bounce back boom, there will be operators that will go under, and therefore, you know, I do think there's going to be more distressed properties on the market, but we'll wait and see if I'm right on that. And just a few more. I think we've talked about the get great advisors, because will the local authorities try and refuse or not? Don't know. One just a point to note. So this isn't all about retail. This is also, sorry. This is all about, you know, this is a many Class E uses. What this Class MA does is reintroduce permitted development rights for conversion of light industrial premises, which previously expired on the 1st of October last year. So, you know, if you've got a light industrial property that is in a residential area, this is back on the table again, which I think is a really good opportunity. Actually, there's not loads of them out there, but if you can find them, they are good ones.
Well, that's the old, because the old Class PA, I think, had a maximum size of about 400 square meters. I think it's about 4,000 feet, and of course this is now 16,000 feet as well. So a whole bunch of, you know, it's 4 times the size of what it was originally. So we'll have a little look for that. We'll find some of those for you, Suzi, if that's the kind of stuff you're after.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all over that. Watch your NGDVs and your end pricing. This isn't going to work everywhere. You know, the end values just won't stack up. The residential end values won't necessarily stack up everywhere to justify the conversions. And then, so you know, as part of that, look at whether you're going to rent or whether you could sell part to be able to, you know, kind of get your feasibility looking better. But look for other uses. So if this doesn't stack in your particular town or investing location, either move to an area where it does, or look for other uses that could use this. So one that immediately springs to mind, and it won't be compatible with some ground floor uses, is kind of supported living, care providers who might take a 5-year lease, and therefore you could get a reval on a commercial basis because of that. Or sometimes they take longer leases, 10, 15-year leases. So, you know, obviously it's very property specific. It's very kind of provider specific. But even if it doesn't kind of stack for residential, does it stack for that kind of use? As I said, no HMOs under this, but you could apply for planning afterwards. Or if you actually want to do an HMO, perhaps you just go for planning anyway and just circumnavigate MA. I think, you know, the permitted development rights aren't the be all and end all. And we need to kind of, if actually you want to apply for a 16-bed HMO in a property, then, and you think you've got a good case to do so, then I wouldn't go for Class MA first. I'd actually just go straight in with my HMO application, because it'll actually be quicker than kind of then having to reapply.
I wonder if you kind of get back into the old world of submitting 2 applications at the same time. So have your MA application cruising along saying, well, actually, my office is going to Resi. If you refuse this HMO one over here, it's going to Resi under Class MA. Try refusing that one. But actually, I'd really like the HMO one, and sort of, it's almost like a stick to beat the council with, isn't it? In some respects.
Absolutely. And I think that would work really well. As I said, look at other end users. And I kind of, can you move the tenant and then convert? So can you serve notices on the tenant and get the vacancy condition? That's what we talked about earlier. don't forget that planning permission is still required for any physical alterations or development works associated with the conversion. Obviously, if you are in a conservation area or whatever, then you'll need conservation area consent as well. You know, don't dismiss retaining commercial, you know, whether that's just on the ground floor or part of the ground floor. Don't forget you can actually carve off, make a smaller ground floor unit and actually then carve off the back. I think that flexible offices, serviced offices work really well with some residential and upper floors. You know, they're not particularly noisy use, but, you know, and as Paul was saying, in certain locations, the commercial is just going to stack better on the ground floor than residential. So definitely.
Well, you can sort of see sort of various areas where you think, well, actually the zone A's are way too high, but zone C is 10 quid or what, you know, 40 quid a foot zone A, zone C is 10 quid. Well, that converts at the backs, take the zone C away, and then convert the upper parts under your class MA tanks. Upper parts could be under class G happy days tanks. It's kind of, it's sort of, but that front core bit of the retail space is going to be more valuable as retail anyway.
Yeah, and if you cut off the front off, you could actually make a really small unit if you wanted. You know, it could be a nail bar or a beauty salon or something like that. Obviously, it's all demand led, so just make sure that you can fill it. But you can still do the bulk of, you know, even if these Article 4 directions come in, you might be able to get around it by retaining a small retail unit at the front and just putting like a serviced operator like that in. And then just one thing to leave you with, I guess, is that if this really takes off the way the government want it to, then over time, and it could happen quite quickly if the market responds quickly, or it could happen quite gradually and slowly, a lot of retail units especially will be soaked up. And therefore, is there a strategy where you kind of go a bit counter market, and rather than kind of jumping on the commercial to resi bandwagon, you actually hold retail in good towns, because there could actually be some supply demand tension in 5 years' time, because there's been a load of these commercial conversions. So it's just a bit of a contrary view to the whole kind of conversions, is that and I kind of bang on about this quite a lot, but sometimes conversion to residential isn't always the best strategy. So it's just worth knowing your market inside out so you understand that. And that, Paul, was everything I was going to talk about. I did have a Nimbus Maps thing there, but it didn't come up. So.
Well, yeah, let me, perhaps if I take over then. So what I was going to just do, my end, was just kind of have a quick chat about how Nimbus can help with this, and sort of perhaps try and pick up on some of those points that Suzi's raised. And what we'll do in a moment is we'll perhaps have a little play with the system just to kind of help bring that to life a little bit for you. And then we'll do a live Q&A at the end, and we'll run some polls and that kind of stuff in the usual way. But really, for me, there's 8 ways to find land with the elite platform. That's kind of our middle tier, if you like, and that really is kind of looking at the uses search. You know, how do we find those office buildings that are sat in the chimney pots? How do we find those little industrial buildings that are sat behind the chimney pots as well, that we've got the new Class MA PD rights on? There's availability, so commercial properties that are on the market at the moment is shown on the availability overlay in the platform. We'll show you that in a moment too. And then I suppose the interesting one that I always find useful in this sort of example, so as Suzi's saying, you know, not all of these buildings will convert to residential and stack up, and actually that may not be the right exit. And the 5th way to find land with the elite platform is the stuff that's in for planning. There's a planning export that I'll show you in a moment. In essence, what's worth remembering on that is that if you run a search for the word office, for example, in a particular council area, what you'll find is planning applications that say we're going to build an office, but you'll also find planning applications that convert an office from office use into. And the question mark at the end of that is, well, what is that into use? What is that building being converted to? We're assuming residential, but maybe it's student, maybe it's health, maybe it's, you know, kind of what is that final use? And what you'll see that on the planning export. Because I'm a huge believer that actually you're rarely the first person in a marketplace to do a particular scheme. And so if you look back at the history of what's been going on in that marketplace through something like the planning export on Nimbus, then that will show you that sort of local market sort of trend, that local market sentiment of what's happening in that particular area. There are obviously things we can do around targeting particular portfolios, that Debenhams thing that Suzi was saying, well, what's in the Debenhams portfolio? Let's go target the owners of those buildings. Let's go look at an upper parts to convert to resi. Let's look at taking the rear part of that building off, creating a front part of it, which is kind of high zone A rents, but the back bit will be much lower. So does that convert, and the other parts of those convert too. So there's some stuff around that we can also do. The obvious next step around all of that is that Elite Plus system. So in the Elite Plus system, we have specific, in effect, overlays that show you specific buildings where we've pre-checked to say, well, are these the right uses? Are they in the right locations? Would they then sensibly convert and make a profit? And if so, what's that level of profit in which the most viable schemes in effect? And the two that really kind of sit well today are really the shops with uppers strategy. So that's the old Class G PD rights, got a retail unit on the ground floor, 2 stories of flats above it. Those then go under Class L, I think it is, isn't it, for into HMO at the end of that, sort of after that conversion too. But then also the low value commercial buildings in residential areas where what you've then got is you've got those small industrial buildings that sit behind chimney pots, and they're very quick to sort of pick out. Within that, there's a calculation, sort of a calculation to say, well, should this stack to convert to residential? Is it a residential area? Does it have a residential feel to it? And so those kind of two will be very useful for today's sort of webinar, if you like. We're going to show you some of this stuff. So this is the information pile, just seeing information about particular buildings. We can understand the local market. We see comparables. What's that price that those buildings are being sold for, and the commercial availability too, to kind of show what the quoting prices are for similar stuff in the area, or indeed to go and acquire the stuff on that commercial availability too. We've then got that residential comparables, so we can see firstly whether we're looking in an area that's a decent area, so it's kind of this little overlay that shows us where the good parts of town, the bad parts of town are, and also then which residential properties are actually sold. And so what are those key values that what are we really going to sell this thing for once we build it out, obviously. We've also got residential yields, and I suppose the sort of the HMO overlay is kind of useful if you're thinking about that Part L or Class L PD rights, to take those perhaps shops with uppers and then putting, once you've got your 2 flats upstairs, then converting those into to HMOs. I want to know there's an HMO marketplace in that area ready for me to build that unit out into. And the HMO overlay will show you that. Where are all the HMOs around that location, and are they, so in effect, then is there a marketplace for what I'm trying to do? And I should also see that on the planning export too, to see there's other buildings that are being converted into that use. So I kind of got comfort that the marketplace is kind of ready for the scheme that I've got proposed. On top of that, what's also perhaps useful if you're looking to find the right design team. So that's kind of something that I'm a big fan of. Sort of not all architects are born equal, quite frankly, and some are particularly good at certain things, and picking the right one is a sort of a really important thing. I've got the scars to prove kind of what happens when you get the wrong one. So sort of a big fan of all of that. And actually what you can do with the planning export is you can filter it and limit it. So who were the developers in this area doing similar kind of schemes, and then who did they trust? Who were their design team? And if, off the back of that, you can also go and search for the sort of across what they've been submitting, what planning applications have been. So are they the right kind of person for the right kind of scheme that I'm proposing in effect? Finally, there's the lease negotiations part of this. So if we are carving that front unit out, we're letting that to a Greg's or a Cafe Nero, whoever else it might be, there's a little tool where you can go off and you can explore the company details. You can go and see the details of the portfolio. That all gets plotted on the map, and then usefully kind of exported to Excel, where you can then go and see the details of the particular lease they've taken. You can download a copy of that lease, see all the terms that are in there. So you can really pinpoint on the heads of terms you're sent at the start of this process. You can see, well, what were the last leases they took? What were the rents they paid? What were the did they have RPI uplifts in the rent reviews? Was it upward only rent reviews? Was there a parent company guarantee in it? Was it a 15-year unbroken lease, or was it were there breaks at 5 and 10 and all that kind of stuff? And that little export there will help you sort of through all of that. So what I was going to do is just try and bring some of that to life. So what I would like to do is just ask in the chat if anybody would like to pop a location into the chat for me in terms of where perhaps they're looking. Well, perhaps if we've got quite a sort of a big audience today, so we should have plenty of people. So we're just popping up. Well, let's go to Cambridge. That's I have a particular affinity with Cambridge. Let's go to Cambridge. So let's jump into dear old Cambridge. I believe the finest university in the country is in that place, albeit that may or may not be true. So this is the elite platform. So we have a little search at the top here. What the system's doing at the moment is plotting all the ownership around the centre of Cambridge, in effect. Now, the first thing to do when we're looking in an area like, well, anywhere across the country, quite frankly, is to firstly understand the little marketplace that we're looking at. So the first thing I want to understand is what are the average values across Cambridge? So Cambridge, obviously, we know has got a university, it's got the kind of the pomp and all the kind of the attractive little town centre and this sort of stuff. But what we don't understand is what premium is there associated with being in the centre of Cambridge as opposed to being outside Cambridge. And what you can see here by plotting the average values across Cambridge is there's a sort of pocket in the centre where you've got all the backs and all the kind of the college and this sort of stuff, where there's an average sale price of over £600 a foot. It's the average sale price of all houses and flats and that sort of stuff in that area. And as you go kind of north and out and outside that centre, those values tumble down to about £400 a foot. So there's a sort of 50% premium to live in the centre of Cambridge over and above sort of the surrounding areas. The next thing then is, well, actually, whereabouts in Cambridge are all the HMOs? And this little overlay here is just showing me across Cambridge, well, actually, all the sort of the HMOs are all kind of all around these different areas. So in effect, if I'm going to go and do a commercial conversion in any of those areas, then of course the key thing to do is to think, well, actually, is there that HMO exit at the end of the day too? So that's going to show me that stuff. We've got the same with residential yields. We can see kind of average yields, and we can sort of see, well, actually, which are the properties that are getting the highest yields across those areas and this sort of stuff. So we can really start to pin down what are those exits we're going to be doing? Are we building stuff out to rent it? Are we building it to sell it? Kind of how's that going to look? And really start to understand all of that. Within that elite platform, then we also have these filters where we can do a uses filter. So we can say, actually, just show me all the offices in this area, and the system will kind of thin all that out for me. Just show me those particular buildings. But I'm going to sort of skip across just for the benefit of speed, really, and jump into what we call our Elite Plus system. And the Elite Plus system is sort of the level above the middle tier. It's our kind of top tier here at Nimbus. And that brings in this little strategy section just here. So what we have in this strategy section is this sort of the two I was talking about a moment ago with the shops and uppers strategy and the low value commercial properties in residential areas. So if I click on those, what this then does is it goes off and it says, well, where do I see commercial buildings? And so then where do they have kind of a residential feel to them? Where are they sitting around other residential buildings, other sort of up and down the street, sort of neighbouring and this sort of stuff? And then looks at the particular details of those particular properties. So I'm going to sort of pick somewhere that kind of looks interesting. So for example, over here we have a property. This property here is an office building. It's 4.5, nearly 5,000 square feet. It's got a rate assessment of £13 a foot. So the rent of that is probably 15, 16, 17 quid a foot, something like that. If we assume an 8% initial yield and a conversion cost of 2/3 of new build, then Nimbus thinks you can buy that and convert it about £310 a foot. The average sales price in this particular part of Cambridge is kind of moving out of that central part, so it's kind of in the less valuable part of Cambridge. The average price is £480 a foot. So assuming we sell for an average sale price, we buy it for a sensible 8% yield, maybe probably a little bit higher than that. It might get a sort of a slightly keener yield in Cambridge than that at the moment. But equally, you'd hope you sell for better than average sales prices in that location too. Then the predicted profit there is nearly 860 grand just off that particular building. And we can then dive into a lot more detail around that specific building. So there's the building itself. It's owned by 100 Houses Society. They all bought it in 2004. We can see a site area of just over 1/4 of an acre. We can sort of see this sort of residential feel to the particular property, all kind of around, and houses down here and houses around the side and this sort of stuff. You can then see a planning history for the particular property and the surrounding area. I can see the property's not listed, it's not in a flood zone, it's not in Greenbelt or AONB. So very quickly, I've got this kind of understanding of this particular property. I've then got some little tools that allow me to kind of let a campaign very quickly and this sort of stuff. There's a little workflow section that we can show you at some other point. So very quickly, I can start to identify these sorts of buildings. Again, we've got a little thing at the back there. There's a little office around the back. And what I want to have a little look for is just to see if I can find a little where's a little day nursery. Again, that's part of Class E as well as part of the new PD rights. And what I'm looking for you, Suzi, at the moment is a little commercial unit sort of tucked around behind the chimney pots, because that was the thing you were kind of most interested in earlier. And the demonstration. So I'm going to see if we can find one there. Oh, that's a little office actually, isn't it? Little dance studio there. That's perhaps not the one you're after, but in essence, this particular. There we go. There's a little workshop there. That's the one you're after. So the workshop at the back there. So 9,500 square feet. It's got a rental level of about £6 a foot, I suspect, off the back of that. Basically, you buy and convert about 170 quid, and it's worth 500 when you've done that. So some big lumps of uplifts in that. Obviously, with the little residential properties either side of it and residential behind it and this sort of stuff, it sort of sits in that kind of residential feel in that location, in effect. So those were sort of the bits that I wanted to kind of quickly show you. I suppose on top of that, if we're going to go and commit to a scheme like that, let me just go and put my residential comparable search on. Then what the system has now done is show me all the properties that have sold in that area too. So I can then export those into Excel, give me a little list of, well, what are those sales prices around that particular property we're going to go and target, in effect, and pops into Excel. So I'm going to get a little list of all of those properties there, a little rate per square foot, sort of showing me, $550 a foot, pretty clear, maybe even pushing $650 in some of those properties, but certainly a weighted evidence at around $550 a foot for that particular property in that area, in effect. So very kind of quick ways of doing all of that. I suppose the final thing was, if I'd picked out one of those offices, for example, then what would then be interesting is to say, well, actually, if I did a search across the Cambridge City Council for an office planning application, in effect. Actually, a little kind of quicker way to do it is just click this little button down here, in effect. This little search here is going to find me any planning applications that mention the word office or B1C, B1A, B1, and exclude anything that's kind of then not office related, in effect. It's going to remove any sort of prior approvals and this sort of stuff. What I want to do here is I want to find planning applications that are talking about out and out offices in Cambridge. And the reason I'm interested in that is that I want to see, well, what are these offices converting to? So if I pick an office off that overlay, off that strategy that I've just shown you a moment ago, and I then want to say, well, who's the right design team? What are the schemes that have kind of gone forward in this area, and what do they look like? Then this little tool here is going to help me with that. And what's also going to be interesting with it is it's going to go off and find those planning applications. Then going to link those to the owners of the property. It's going to tell us when they bought them, so we can start to see, well, actually, which of these buildings were bought most recently. Off the back of that, it's also then going to show me, well, who were the architects they instructed, who were the planners they instructed as part of that. So through that journey we've just talked through with Suzi, we can then understand exactly kind of which of those architects and planners we're interested in. Give that a moment to quickly generate. Is this all making sense, Suzi? We're kind of all happy with this?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I use this a lot, and I think it's really, really useful.
Fabulous. Just taking a moment to generate that little tool. So the other thing just to have a quick look at was then also the availability. So kind of which of the local surveyors that are active across Cambridge. Well, there's a little A there, so we can see Savills has got a little office on the market around the corner there. We've got again Savills with some other stuff there, little properties to let and this sort of stuff. So kind of who are those active local agents? Who ones I kind of go and get in touch with to kind of create those relationships with, in effect. And that's kind of what that will show you. The final bit I was just kind of showing was this list of the planning applications in the area. I'm going to drag that across my other screen. So this is our planning export. And where this becomes really useful is that what we can see over here. So this is the location that we found the planning application effect across the Cambridge website. There's the reference number for the planning application. But then down here we've got all these different little applications that have been submitted. And what we should be able to do is sort of see, is there any kind of change of uses of things? Especially the building block space, actually, is kind of interesting. Sort of a big office scheme going forward there. Change of use, conversion to office gallery, blah, blah, blah. So it matters for 5-story office building. So actually, there's not a kind of huge amount of change of use, actually. Change of use of one office to bedsit flat is not particularly interesting, and that got refused permission too. So whether the office to resi scheme in Cambridge looks particularly interesting or not, I'm not entirely convinced, actually, which is kind of interesting. So demolition relocation of office, not sure about that. Change of use, conversion of a stable to office. Most of it's actually going to office use, actually. I suspect there's kind of Article 4s that are kind of causing us problems in in Cambridge, actually, which is kind of interesting. And I guess kind of with that sort of offices being the thing we're building, of course, then what we also have then across the top here is kind of a link to the title that the property sits on, who bought that property. So down here we can see Red Row Homes bought something down there, perhaps interesting. Over here we have the date the property last sold. So of course, what we could then do is filter across the top of that to say, well, where do we see properties that have sold recently? So show me all the properties that have sold in the last few years. So suddenly we have recent applications for an office or a conversion of an office to something else. We have then a list then, of course, of which then have a purchase, the property's changed hands recently as part of that. So suddenly we then have a list of active people doing those schemes in those particular areas, a list of little some developers doing some schemes in those areas. And of course, then the price they paid then becomes interesting, so it starts to give us some land comparables as part of that. And finally, well, who were the planners that they were using as part of that? Who were the people that they were sort of relying on to get their planning consents for them? Well, here we go, sort of Liz King Architects and Carter Jonas, and so who are those architects that kind of understand that local marketplace and have the links with the local council there in effect. Hopefully all that's kind of clear. I hope that wasn't too in depth. What we're going to do is actually, well, firstly, let's just jump back into the slides. So, Suzi, if people want to kind of get in touch with you, kind of how can you help people if people are kind of thinking about conversions, thinking about commercial investments, kind of how would that work?
Yeah, so yeah, feel free. I know a few of you have contacted me already, so thank you. But yeah, here's my contact details. So please do get in touch if you'd like to know any more about what I've talked about today. I do run the Commercial Property Academy, so we open quarterly. It's an online coaching program. So there's an online course with a load of detail about investing in commercial conversions, etc. But I do weekly group mentoring as well. So and that will open again in July. So it's just closed actually. We only open it quarterly. So and there's a really nice community that we've built as kind of part of the mentees. If anyone's interested in that, please do let me know. There's also on the Commercial Property Academy website, there are 2 free webinars, one on niching and one on kind of the effect of COVID on the market. And I'll be recording another one shortly. So if you want to kind of get any more information on some of this stuff, please do go on there.
Fabulous. So from my point of view, if anyone would like to try the Elite platform, so you can hit the ground running right now, you can have a free trial of the Elite platform with us. It's part of that, access to all those tools that I've just shown you a moment ago, so you can replicate that yourself and you can crack on with that. If you'd like to do that, of course, as part of that, you have access to our customer support team here at Nimbus who can help you make sure that you can get the most out of that system. If you'd like to do that, then I'll launch a poll in a second. I've also put a link into the platform for that too. Sorry, into the chat for that too. And also, Suzi and I are going to be running a commercial deals clinic on Monday at 2 o'clock. So if you'd like to join us for that, we'll be running through. You can bring your deals so you can put them in front of us. I'll be on Nimbus. Suzi will be helping sort of work through what the ideas might be and whether the things you've got in mind stack up or not. So if you're interested in that too, I'm going to drop that into the chat in a moment too as well. So in fact, I say that I've put some links into the chat. So I've put Suzi's email address into the chat so you can get in touch with Suzi. I've put a link for a one-to-one demo. So if you want to take a trial with us and you want a one-to-one demo of how to use that in your particular area for the particular things you're interested in, there's a link for that at the start. The second one is the link through to the commercial deals clinic on Monday with myself and Suzi. The next one is a link for the free trial for the Elite platform. And then finally, I thought would be useful as well is that next week, my brother Asay is doing a webinar with the requirements list. So Adam Crook's there, who will talk about which requirements are hot at the moment. And kind of, I guess that might be a pun in that as well, given sort of coffee and that sort of stuff. But which requirements are kind of really hot at the moment. So if you want to join us for that next week, then I've put a link for that as well. Our next job, Suzi, is a Q&A session. So we should get ourselves ready for that. And in the meantime, what I'll do is also run a poll for you as well. So if you'd like to join us on the one-to-one demonstration for Nimbus, that first question's for you. If you'd like to book a place on the commercial deals clinic on Monday, that the second question's for you. And if you'd like to register for the Property Academy to get the access to two free webinars, that third question is for you. We're going to take a brief break for just 2 minutes, and then we're back for some live questions in a second. Fabulous. So we're now good to go. Let's just get Suzi back on. So if you'd like to ask myself or Suzi a question, then what I'd like you to do is on your control panel for your Zoom controls, there's a little raise hand button. And if you could raise your hand there, then what we'll do is we'll get you live onto us here. We'll get you to ask the question to us to live. Get you to answer that. Get you to ask that question live. I'll spit my words out in a minute. So we've got 2 people with their hands up, or 3 people with their hands up at the moment. So let's just see. Hi Jay, can you hear us? Okay. Seems not. That's a bad start. Let's try Justin. Hi Justin, can you hear us? Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for the webinar, interesting. This might be a daft question, either of you can answer it, but I'm going to ask it anyway because you can't see me on camera, so I'm hidden from embarrassment.
I love it.
So I'm currently focused on residential property, and my question is around, could you employ rent-to-rent or rent-to-SA style of techniques with commercial properties? So the reason I ask that is it avoids then bidding for property, and you could then approach landlords who would have properties up for who are vacant, because there's probably quite a few of them around. I don't know if that's a sensible question or not.
So I think there's kind of, in my head, there's a maybe to that, I think. So I think what you could do is you could offer some sort of in my head, you've got a retail on the ground floor with some upper parts. You could offer a sort of a reasonable length lease upstairs, where you pay for the conversion costs. You take a 20-year lease upstairs, you pay a third of the market rent for kind of compare with what you're actually going to create. That would give the landlord some long-term secure income. You're going to spend a lot of money tarting the building up upstairs. You haven't got to buy the building, you haven't got to kind of invest in that building, but then you could obviously you'd let it out full rent for 20 years in effect. So the landlord's getting a nice long lease with something, broadly speaking, about market value for the in terms of market rent for the upper parts.
Yeah.
You refurb, all the only cost you've got is the refurb cost, which then you get back over the 20-year period, off the back of a higher rent, off the back of that. So I think that would be my take on that. Suzi, what do you think?
Yeah, that could work for sure. I think you just need to be absolutely upfront with a landlord if you're going to do that. You couldn't sneak it in because there's usually very specific use class uses in leases, commercial leases. It said, it's within Class E or whatever. So if you're outside of that, you'd be in breach of the lease, and the landlord could forfeit your lease. They could kind of take the lease back. So you'd have to be very upfront and come to an agreement like that. And if you weren't doing it, I think that kind of model works really well. I'm not saying so much for residential, although I think what Paul just said could work. But especially if you were looking to run like flexible offices space or like another operation like that, that works really well off a rent-to-rent type model. So you definitely don't need to buy the freehold as a result of that. I would suggest that you might want to put an option to purchase in if you can, so that you kind of get the long-term capital value if you're going to massively increase it. But as long as you stretch the deal right, you might be okay.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Justin. Let's try Martin. Hi, Martin. Can you hear us okay?
You're on mute, Martin.
Yeah, we've got you on mute, I think, Martin. Let's try Annette. Hi, Annette. Can you hear us? Struggling today, aren't we? Struggling. Hi, Annette.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. How are you doing? You all right?
Hi. Yeah, thank you. Really enjoying this. Thanks very much.
Fabulous, thank you.
I've only just seen an office yesterday, which has been vacant for, I don't know how long it's been vacant, but it's been on the market for just over a year or more. Mm-hmm. And after speaking to the commercial agent, I found out that the vendor has just had planning refused on it, even though it's got residential either side of it. So, and I just want to try and be clear in my head. So are you saying from the 1st of August under permitted development MA, it's possible to convert that office to residential with prior approval?
So
or have I got that wrong?
yeah, I think you need to do some more research in that one, because I presume that they've applied under Class O.
Yeah,
for conversion. So I think you need to look at the reasons for that.
Well, they said things like low levels of lighting, and they said flood risk.
Right.
But there's residential all around it. So I don't know why they said flood risk.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, some local authorities are looking for an excuse to refuse these things. So it could be one of those. But yes, so if they've had it refused under Class O, then Class MA is more onerous than Class O. So you'd really need to dig into why that was the case. But yes, subject to the prior approval rights, from the 1st of August, you can convert up to 1,500 square meters to residential, but you have a lot more prior approval matters than you have with Class O. So I would just have a question mark on that one as to why it was refused. And sometimes you can get around these things through relationships with local planning officers by going in, understanding, maybe slightly tweaking the scheme. There might be really simple things you can do by employing a really good planning consultant that you could actually get this through, and you'll probably get it at a knockdown price because it's been refused planning. So I definitely would still look at it, but you just need to look into the detail of it.
I will.
Totally.
And can I just, because I don't, prior approval, how do I go about getting prior approval? Is that just a matter of planning, contacting the planning department? Is there a cost to it?
Yeah, so you just need to submit a prior approval application. So a planning advisor will be able to help you with that, or contact your local planning officer and they'll be able to send you all the details of how you do that. Yeah.
Okay, then. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Yes, thank you, Annette. Let's try Ian. Hi, Ian. Can you hear us okay? Let's see if we can ask him to unmute again. That nerve-wracking moment. Will we get him to say?
Can you hear me now?
Hi, Ian. Yes, we can. Well done. Brilliant.
All right.
How are you doing?
Just a very, very simple one. Those tables that you put up, Susie, showing the different classes and so on. Is it possible to get a copy of those?
Yeah, if you drop me an email, Ian, I'd be delighted to send that through to you. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
Right, let me just see who else we've got. We have Stephen. Hi, Stephen. Can you hear us okay?
I can.
Fabulous. Thanks. How are you getting on?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Right, yeah, we've used your trial on the Nimbus Elite, and it was great. We've been able to identify a few possible opportunities for commercial to residential, hopefully. What my question is what would you advise the best format for our approach to the direct to vendor, rather than, I've seen some of the residential stuff, and no disrespect to anyone doing that, it looks great, but it just seems a little less professional than I'm feeling it might need to be for the the commercial landlords. I don't know. So yeah, looking for some advice on that, really, please.
Yeah. Do you want me to, Suzi, or do you want to?
Yeah, I'll chip in afterwards.
Yeah. So I think for me, I think a letter, it just wants to be very soft, regardless of whether you're writing with a company or not, whether you're writing about a house or whether you're writing out about an office building. I've read a lot of these letters in the past, which used to be kind of get my dictaphone out of my pocket and kind of draft it up every time. I think that's the wrong thing to do. I think you want a standard template if you can, because then you can start to understand. You start to split test. Do you get a better response if you put certain stuff in? I think I might dwell a bit more on my track records if I was writing out on a commercial building. If you're writing someone that owns a house, it's just, do you want to sell part, all or part, and yes or no. I think on a commercial building, you might want to say, I've got this portfolio of similar things that are nearby, or here's perhaps a scheme that I've done historically or something like that. So I might want to kind of test that. But equally, sort of one of the benefits of something like Nimbus is that you can send enough letters to then sort of gauge the response rates. And so actually, does that kind of that extra stuff that I'm putting into the letter, does anybody read it? Does anybody care? The response rates will kind of answer that for you. And so there's kind of what Suzi and I think work best, but equally you can kind of prove it for yourself if you go and find yourself 100 of these. Go and use the low value commercial and residential areas. Go and find yourself 100 of those things. Send 100 letters out and sort of gauge the response rates back off. Perhaps 2 lots of 50, and see what kind of response rate you get off each of them, and you'll see then kind of what that letter wants to look like. I think you've got a decent letterhead with it sort of looks like a proper piece of correspondence, if you like, with a reference and a dear sir and re, and it looks kind of legitimate. Then I think that's the content of it can just be professional. It doesn't. So I think that's kind of really my point. What do you think, Suzi?
Yeah, so just to add to that, I would say that speed and certainty are what they'll be looking for, and therefore I think if you're a cash purchaser, if you don't have to go for finance for it, that's a massive selling point, especially in this market where the finance market's really tight. So if you're able to say that you're a cash purchaser, or whatever that might be, I think that might get you through the door.
That's interesting. Okay, have you had anyone? Have you had any feedback from anyone who's tried this, having used your trial period as yet, or is this the first time you've been hit with this question?
No, yeah, we've got an awful lot of customers doing exactly that. Yeah, it's very much the way to do this. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. Fabulous. Well, we've got a few more questions, but I'm just conscious of time now. So I think really from me, the last thing really to do is to say thank you. Thank you, Suzi, for your time today. Thank you for a really interesting presentation. Thank you for the questions at the end.
Pleasure. No, great to be here, Paul. Thanks for having me. And
we'll look forward to seeing you on Monday for our deals clinic too, where we'll be hosting a lot of these kind of questions live then. So if you want to kind of join us for that, then we'll be delighted to host the audience again for that. So thank you, Suzi. Lovely to see you on Monday.
Great. See you then. Thanks, everyone.
Fabulous. And then just to finally, a thank you from me. Thank you to you all for watching today. I've been Paul Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best.